the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb. When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. The word of the Lord. Remember your days in school, those awful days when you'd have to take tests? Especially like elementary and middle school tests. And the tests usually came in a couple formats. They were true and false questions. And I kind of liked those because at least you had a 50-50 chance of getting something right. You know? And then there was multiple choice. You had the right answer in front of you. You just had to figure out which one it might be and try to pick that one. There were matching questions where you had words on both sides and you had to try to figure out which one fit together. But the hardest of the questions for me were the fill in the blank. Right there in the middle of the sentence, there was a blank, maybe two of them, and you had to figure out what went in there. The answer wasn't in front of you. There weren't any clues. You had to examine the question and come up with the answer yourself. All right, let me ask you about something different. Read any good books lately? I tend to read a lot. I don't read many novels, but when I do, I'm always impressed at the storyteller's ability to tell a story. When you find a good novel, it's a page turner. You want to know what happens next. You want to know how the story ends. I actually knew a guy once. He said, "Well, when I get a novel, I flip to the end to see how it ends, and then I determine if it's worth reading the rest of the book." But do you ever find yourself trying to figure out, as you're reading it, how the story is going to end? I know I do, and I'm usually pretty happy when the author puts a little twist in it right towards the end, something that you didn't see, something that you didn't see coming, that makes you think, that makes you glad you took the time to read that book. Well, today's scripture lesson has some similarities in a way to those tests that you took in school and to a good mystery, because Mark's gospel recounts the story of Jesus. But the story takes a surprising twist at the end of the story, because we find that the story has no ending. With a sudden twist at the end, he leaves it to us to fill in the blanks. See, those oldest copies of Mark end right where our reading did today. "And they went out from the tomb, for fear and astonishment gripped them, and they said," and they told no one anything, for they were afraid. End of story. Now that's a surprise ending. Some biblical scholars believe that the beginning of Mark, since there's no account of Jesus' birth, and also the end of Mark may have been lost through the years, or that some later versions that have a longer and more complete ending may have been found from some remnants of earlier versions. But what if Mark had indeed ended his account with the two Marys running from the tomb and them being afraid? What would it have meant? And why would he have done that? Well, let's back up a few verses and see what led to this abrupt ending. Jesus had been crucified on Friday, and since sundown, represented the start of Sabbath, they were in a hurry to get him into the tomb before the Sabbath began because no work could be done on the Sabbath. As a result, the proper preparation of Jesus' body for burial had not taken place. As the Sabbath ended, Sunday morning, the two Marys go to the tomb. They go as early as possible, just as soon as the sun came up, which is why there's sunrise services all around town. Now, personally, I would have liked for them to have slept in a little bit, had a big breakfast, then headed down to the tomb. But their going early represents just how important this was to them, just how important Jesus was to them. Just as soon as it was possible, they went to serve the Lord, even after his death. As they headed to the tomb, it was a very sad time, remembering the events of the week. From the triumph of Jesus' entry into Jerusalem, to the betrayal by a friend, to the kangaroo court that he faced, and ultimately to his grisly death on the cross. Think of the swings and emotions that they had in that 1 week. From that Palm Sunday high to that Good Friday lowest of lows. On their way to the tomb, I'm sure the women weren't discussing an impending resurrection. They weren't discussing spreading the good news, because as far as they were concerned, there wasn't any good news. Now, the focus of their conversation, Mark reports, was about who was going to roll away that big stone. Those big stone wheels were heavy, much too heavy for two women to move, which again makes me wonder, why didn't they sleep in a little bit and wait till the guys would get up and be able to go down and help them? But they couldn't wait. They just had to go, even just on their own, just as soon as they could. And when they arrived at the tomb, they found that their worry was relieved. The stone had already been rolled away. But that led to new anxieties. By whom? There was no one else around. Was Jesus' body still in there? Had Pilate and his henchmen taken the body somewhere? Seeing the tomb open must have been a disappointment for them. If they'd come all this way and they didn't get to anoint the body, that was going to make them feel even worse than they had before. So they peek into the tomb, looking for the body. And they see a body in there, but it's not Jesus. Some angel. He's sitting up. Now, I think at this point, their hearts would have been pumping, the adrenal glands would have been going, and the two Marys were really wondering what was going on. The person in the tomb tells them he's a messenger, one who was sent to tell the women to go tell the disciples and Peter that Jesus had risen. All right, now that had to be like absolutely overwhelming for the two Marys. The tomb was empty. They had toted all those spices and ointments down there for nothing. And now here was this stranger telling them that Jesus had risen from the grave. Risen from the grave. Now at that point, they had to start scouring their memories, trying to think of anything Jesus would have said to them that would have made sense of this. Did he ever mention rising from the dead? Well, of course he did, but he spoke so often in parables, and sometimes they didn't always understand what he meant. Sometimes they even had to muster up the courage to ask him later on, just what in the world was he talking about? Maybe the two Marys thought what he had told them had indeed come to pass. What a surprise. What a twist. It was the unexpected that they should have expected. But the events of the morning did not make them radiant with joy and filled with courage. No, the passage tells us they left in fear, for they were astonished, and they did not tell anyone. Well, I assume they told someone, or we wouldn't be here this morning. Presumably, they didn't tell anyone until they saw the disciples and Peter. And Peter gets singled out by that angel in the tomb, which must have been, without a doubt, good news for Peter, who must have still been anguishing about his 3 denials of Jesus just days earlier. How caring, how thoughtful of Jesus. The first person he reaches out to with his message following his resurrection is a person who had been disloyal. Jesus is more concerned about the remorse Peter was suffering than by what Peter had done. Such a comforting message for Peter to hear. The Lord is risen. And if Peter goes to Galilee, he can see him there in person. That's where the story ends. Imagine what the first readers of this gospel thought. Well, does Peter go to Galilee? Does he get to see Jesus in person again? What if the women at the tomb were too afraid to ever tell Peter? Oh, that would be sad. So how does the story end? What happens next? In my house, one of the most frequently watched TV shows is Wheel of Fortune. It's not really because we like Wheel of Fortune. It comes on after the news, and so it just kind of, most nights, it just seems to be on. Well, you know how the show works. There's hidden words or phrases on this large stage, and the contestants have to guess the letters to try to figure out what word or phrase that they make up. And once they figure out enough of the letters, then the players try to solve the puzzle by filling in the blanks to get the answer. And Mark's gospel is sort of like that. In the gospel, he tells about Jesus. He tells about how Jesus teaches his disciples. It tells about Jesus telling them what's going to happen. Jesus telling them that he'll be crucified again on the 3rd day and he will rise. So all these pieces of the story, and they have to figure out what's in the blanks. Well, Jesus does indeed get arrested, and he indeed gets crucified. But at the end of the story, the conclusion about what happens on that 3rd day is left up to you. It's like a fill-in-the-blank question. It's up to you to write in what you believe happened. Mark's not giving away the answer. It's up to you to try to figure out. It's up to you to believe whether or not Jesus is risen. And what you believe leads to how you live your life, how you treat others, and it carries with it eternal consequences. It's the most important test question you'll face in this lifetime. It's Easter Sunday. The tomb is empty. What do you believe happened? How do you fill in the blank? In the name of the Father, and the Son, the Holy Spirit.